Hello, good evening, everybody. First of all, I'm just so happy to see an audience in front of us at this tribune. So I want to thank you all very much for being here today. As you may know, this is the retake of the BK Talks that we had to cancel or suspend for many months because of lockdown, because of obvious reasons. We all know what happened, and we are more than happy to be back in person, even though it's with a limited audience. It's great to see students in front of us. So my name is Javier, for those who don't know me, and I am the curator of public programs at the faculty. The BK Talks is an adventure that started in the beginning of this academic year, in the month of September. And the first BK Talk that we organized had to do with diversity. It was a very well-received event. And a few weeks later, two people, Tomi and Kat, which are sitting with us here, contacted me and told me that they needed to keep talking about diversity, that they understood that diversity was something or a subject that was not really treated at our faculty, and that they wanted to do something about it. After a few minutes, it was clear that we needed to celebrate another BK Talk on this. Of course, Corona came, we canceled, we postponed, we suspended, we didn't know what was happening, but finally we are here today. Tomi and Kat will take the word in a moment. I would like to thank very much not only Tomi and Kat, but also Federico, Nyasha, Francine, Lyongo, and Roberto for joining us here. Before I give the word, I hope to the moderators, I hope that we can develop this conversation on diversity that's so vital is for everyone. Very recently, I saw this sentence written in one of the walls of the Centre Pompidou in Paris. No? This is something that was said by Hans Hofmann, the painter, who made great work. He wrote about the work of one of his students. This painting is so good, you'd never know it was done by a woman. This was written in 1937. And I wonder how far have we gone from there? So not only in terms of gender discrimination, but also in terms of race, sexuality, the accent that we have, etc., etc., etc. Today we will be talking about some of these topics. And I hope that we as designers can build better environments that trigger, let's say, difference between all of us, and where each of one of us who may have felt different at once or at some moment, or who still feel different, can still feel different, but within diversity. I will give the word to both Tomi and Kat. You know very much how much I appreciate the work that you have done. We have had a really great time, especially I remember last week was especially fun. So they have done a great work during these months. And please welcome me in joining the moderators and the participants with a big clap. At least finally we can clap. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you all for being here this evening. It's actually really lovely to have an audience to talk to after so long, so thank you all for being here. This BK Talks is entitled Raising Awareness, Dissecting Diversity in Design, and today we're going to really embark on a journey where we have the opportunity to talk about the issue of diversity and inclusion within our context today.
So for most of us, we all look different, but all of our experiences in the kind of journey towards our design education have been quite similar. So our question today is design championing an environment which is exclusive, and how does design play a role in this?
And now, before all of our implicit biases kick in, let's remember that this talk is really about trying to learn, unlearn, and just form really educated opinions about the topic in general. So it's really great to see that so many of you who were part of the video that we're going to show, which is a social experiment video, there were so many of you that are sat in the audience were part of it, so thank you for being part of it. But we are going to show a video of 81 participants who we basically asked very simple questions, yes or no questions, maybe not so simple, but yes or no questions about their experience here at Delft. So please, we hope that you can sit back, relax, open your minds, and enjoy the video that's going to be played now. Thank you.
Have you been taught by a female tutor, professor in the last 5 years?
Have you ever been taught by a male professor, tutor in the last 5 years?
Have you been taught by a white professor or tutor in the past 5 years?
Have you been taught by an Asian tutor or professor in the last 5 years?
Have you been taught by a black professor or black tutor in the past 5 years?
Are you currently working to support your education?
Would you be able to afford your education, fees and equipment without parental or financial support?
Do you think diversity and inclusion is important?
Do you think diversity and inclusion is important within your education at BK?
Do you believe that you are adequately represented in the teaching staff population in BK?
Do you believe you are adequately represented in the student population in BK?
Do you think you will be adequately represented when in practice?
Do you believe the education you're receiving at BK is in touch with the current times?
Do you think your experience would be different to those taught at UDEV 30 years ago?
Do you think your values and interests are represented in the design education?
Do you believe your education prepares you for practice?
Do you believe the process of entering practice is based off of your educational merit?
Are you proud at the thought of being an alumni of BKCT?
So I think it's also really important to caveat in this conversation that we will be discussing these results very briefly, but I think it's important to caveat that within the conversation we won't be able to cover all the facets of diversity and inclusion, but we're just hoping that we can have like a fruitful conversation about it. So just kind of picking out a couple of the statistics that were shown on the video, I think it's interesting to point out that almost 90% of the population couldn't actually afford, didn't think that they would be able to afford financial support without any help from like their parents or anything, and also that everybody thought that diversity and inclusion was important within the brand.
Another thing that was quite interesting to pick out was that whilst the majority of people, or a little bit more the majority of people, of the student population felt represented within the student body here at BK, this slipped, to be fact, slipped when they kind of projected themselves into practice to 40%.
And also that this is an interesting statistic that just about 50% thought that their education was with the current times, and also, but it was good because they thought that their education had possibly progressed since the last 30 years.
And when considering whether our students' kind of values and interests were represented within the design education, we can see it's a rough half-half split, and whether they think that the education actually prepares them for practice, it slips again down to 40%. And this kind of encompasses the start of our conversation.
So now is a really good point for us to really actually introduce the panel discussion of which everything will be based off of. So since we have a live audience, which is lovely, we're going to now just introduce who's on the panel. So first, right next to me, we have Federico. Federico Ruíz Carvajal is a second-year urbanism student at BK, and he is also one of the editors of B News, the independent periodical of the faculty. From his own words, Federico likes jokes, chocomel, and criticizing anything that moves. So preferably all together, he says. So welcome to the panel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the great introduction. Thank you.
Moving on, we have Nyasha, who's sat next to Federico. Nyasha Harper-Michon is an activist, which is a term she coined for architects driving economic, environmental, social reform to foster positive changes in society and within the profession. She's currently working as an architect and business developer for Our Architects and as a columnist for the well-known A-Zine online magazine. And to add to this really impressive list, she's also a guest lecturer at the Amsterdam Academy for Architecture, and is a member of the jury for the Rotterdam Architecture Prize in 2021. So let's give it up.
Thank you. Next on my list, the seating is a little different, but it's okay. Next on my list, we have Roberto Rocco, which most of you will be familiar with from the university. Roberto Rocco is an associate professor of spatial planning and strategy at TU Delft, working and researching metropolitan and regional governance, social stability, and social justice. He's also responsible for course development and coordination in areas of research, research methodology and design practice, regional planning and design, governance and sustainability. He has also recently been appointed our diversity officer for Balkanda, so thank you for being here.
We're thrilled to have Francine Houben here, who is obviously our alumni of TU Delft, but probably more well-known within the architecture community as the founding partner and creative director of Meccano, which has, of course, risen to international acclaim. And for us at TU, we probably know the practice's best work for our own university campus library and Delft Station, so welcome.
And finally, but definitely not least, we have Lyongo, Juliana. He's an architect and director of Oz Caribbean. He studied architectural engineering at TU Eindhoven. As the first architect in residence of 2020 at Arkham Architecture Center Amsterdam, today he also investigates the degree of diversity and inclusiveness of architecture in Amsterdam. He hopes to create a broader perspective in architecture within the industry. Thank you for being here, Lyongo. So now that all the formalities are done, we want to really start the conversation by reacting to the video and the statistics that we've just posed. I want to start with you, Federico, as the student representative in the panel. We were interesting to see if you are maybe surprised by the results, or whether you were expecting the results to come together in the way that they have, and if you could give us a reason for your answer, that would be great.
Well, it's hard because I'm representing a wide diversity of students, and questions were many and answers were different in each case, but a couple of them called my attention. First, the one about like the relevance, of what we study here. That's a discussion we've had many times, mostly the ones coming from outside, because sometimes you question all the time if the tools you're learning here will be as valid if you go out, and especially in urbanism, where most of our studios have to do with the Netherlands. Sometimes you hear about circularity, all these nice things, and we ask like, okay, but if you want to implement circularity in Colombia, it would be at another price, right? So is it as useful, right? Of course, these are questions you can always make. So that's, for example, one. The other one is, of course, and that's a very common debate to have, is representation in the teaching staff. Because sometimes you feel that, or we feel, or we, the students, it's a lot, me and my friends, we feel that the diversity of the faculty happens at this, let's say, lower level of the students, and then as you go up, you feel that it kind of is lost, and is lost in some cases, I mean, especially in some cases, so the Chinese students tell us, yeah, there's one Chinese professor. Indian students say, we see no Indian professor. So, yeah, perhaps those two I can comment on, but again, it's always based on examples and things you hear in the end, so.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting. Maybe also, because we're asking you as you're immersed in the culture, maybe we could come along to maybe Francine, where what would your reaction be to being in practice and looking in and seeing what the students are responding to in terms of their answers of the questions? Were there any questions that really stood out to you, maybe, that surprises you or not?
I think they were not really surprising. Maybe the most surprising for me was that almost no students can deal without their parents to study here. What has nothing to do with diversity, I imagine. So that was kind of shocking for me, because you have a system of, I don't know how you call it. So that was yeah. But maybe also architecture is quite expensive, what you expect students to make. And to be honest, I'm a little bit critical about that. All over the world, it's not just here. And of course, I also recognize the idea that with the students it's even 50-50% or even more female students. And the higher up you go into the leadership of the faculty, it disappears. And that's also not only happening here. So that it's an issue. And we should change that today. Yeah, that's my opinion. We should start to change it today.
Yes, I guess it would be ideal for all of these things to happen so suddenly in terms of changing them. But it's also interesting maybe to just highlight it, because us being immersed inside the culture, we didn't necessarily realize that those were the stats as a collective. So, yeah.
Moving on, Nyasha, did you find any kind of relevant or shocking points, or do these confirm your kind of theories as an activist at the moment?
I think I kind of have to second what you were saying in the sense where it's not so surprising. I think some of the statistics you can imagine that this is what it was going to be like, but I think the socioeconomic one is a bit disappointing, because it just means that maybe then for lower income students it's not as accessible, which is also a big part of diversity, the socioeconomic background. And I think in architecture that's also an issue. We tend to talk about certain parts of diversity, but not necessarily income, which, you know, if we only have upper class people or upper income, however you want to say it, designing for everyone, that's also doesn't make much sense. So I think that that's something to really point out, in a sense where it should be more accessible, and yeah, people of lower income should be able to think, hey, I could be an architect and I could study to do that here.
Accessibility is going to be, I think, a big point of this discussion. But Roberto, as the kind of diversity officer for BK, what do you have to say about these statistics?
Don't hold me responsible yet.
I won't.
I was not shocked. I was a bit shocked to see that everybody actually thought that diversity was important, because I don't think that's exactly true. I don't think everybody agrees with that, but I agree with Nyasha that, as you said, there are many aspects to diversity, and one often forgotten aspect is that even for the Netherlands, we don't have a good representation of the population of the Netherlands, and that's a problem, I think. But also, we have people from all over the world, for sure. But all these people from all over the world, they also come from generally from one social class. And they have very common values, I think. So I think that's a problem.
Yeah, definitely agree. And obviously, you also, Lyongo, do you have any thoughts regarding the video?
Being the last one, most things were said already, but what Roberto said about 100% of the students seeing the importance of diversity and inclusion, if that was true, then I think the world or Delft would be different. So I question that, and I think the next time when you answer that, I think you should think about how much you are willing to give space to the other. Because inclusion is about that. It's not about just accepting, tolerating, but giving space. So that is one point. And what I miss in this point is the group of Dutch people with a migration background. Maybe I will be categorized as a black professor or a black architect, but actually all my ancestors are Dutch. I have no ancestors that were non-Dutch. So yeah, I have ancestors, but that are not human. So what I see in a lot of educational institutions is that they take the diversity subject and take it into international students, which is important. But I think it's more confronting for the Dutch to realize that they have to incorporate the complete Dutch society. Just some figures. I mean, about 25% of the Dutch have a migration background of the total Dutch community, and in the bigger cities, it's over 50%. So you have to realize that. So yeah, I wanted to, that point of the Dutch with the migration background should also always be taken in, but also people, you know, the amount of people that live by themselves, the single people. So yeah.
And I think this gives us an opportunity for the panel, but also for the live audience that we're very excited to have, an opportunity to really define diversity. We found that when we did this social experiment that there was a lot of confusion as to what diversity actually means and who is included in diversity, if anybody at all. So the next part we thought would be a good opportunity for us to look at that.
So we are going to ask our panelists to share with us their given word which encompasses diversity, or another word for diversity, but we will go first. So what does diversity look like to you, Tomi?
Yes, so for us, the word that we came up with was perspective. We felt like perspective really encompasses what diversity is to us in terms of we all come with our own implicit biases. We've all grown up in specific scenarios that have influenced our perspective, our views, and the way we conduct ourselves in life. And therefore, this idea that if we all have our own perspectives, but we marry them up together, it gives us an opportunity to have a broader look on life. So the diversity comes in loads of different perspectives being brought together for people to understand what everyone experiences or sees in life. So that was our word.
Well said. Should we take it to Roberto? Oh wait, actually, I have the word here.
Yeah, I chose the two words color and knowledge, and I understand that if I say color in a diversity debate, people will immediately think he's going to talk about the color of the skin of people, which I think is a worthy subject because the color of the skin of people may really influence their life paths and their life experiences. But I want to draw your attention to something else. We are only able to see 2 million or 3 million colors, and scientifically, there are many, 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 many colors we can't see. So I want to make the point that without science and without investigating and without being inquisitive, there are things we simply can't see, right? And the other thing that I want to draw your attention is that we need to investigate, we need to work to see these colors. And this influences how we build knowledge. Another funny story is that some cultures, they see colors differently. Brazilian Indians, for example, I am Brazilian myself, they are famously not able to distinguish between blue and green. And, but they can see a lot of shades of green that we cannot see. So without specific knowledge from certain groups, we are missing out. That's my point.
That was really beautiful. Thank you. Lyongo.
Yeah. So I took it to the field of architecture and urban design, and you know, the difficulty with names or you know, it's that everybody gives a different meaning to it, and then once you can see it and experience it, then it gets meaning. So urbanismo social, which I experienced in Medellin, Colombia, is exactly what diversity should be for me. And that is, as a designer, to also look at the social aspect, your social task as a designer, and see, you know, include everyone in that, and trying to solve the challenges that the place that you have to design has, however small or big it is, and not just be working for that fee, but be adding to society. So that's what diversity is for me.
I'm loving these different approaches. It's really, really good, really amazing. Difficulty.
That's mine. Yeah. So basically, I believe that a diverse environment is one where you encounter difference constantly. And that encounter is never easy, it's difficult, because you question yourself, your own categories, and you question others, of course. And this difficulty kind of creates this very stimulating place, of course, but it will always be difficult. It's like, you know, you have to train every day to become a better or more competent, better citizen somehow. Just like a football player needs to train every day and endure the difficulties of training. You know, it's just like that. And of course, difficulty is not always a nice thing to accept. So that's where I believe also diversity then can become a monster, no? And we see it, I don't know, every day now in Trump, Bolsonaro, these guys just trying to make life simple again, no? Make America great again, easier, less difficult, less diverse. So I believe that diversity finds in difficulty its strength, its beauty, but also its fragility. So that's why I chose difficulty.
Thank you. That was a great way of spinning it. Thank you. Voices, Nyasha.
Yeah, I chose voices because I always feel like diversity is kind of, being present, having a seat at the table, having these differences juxtaposed. But then we should tend to go towards more inclusion rather than just diversity, because it's not just about being there, but it's about having a voice. And then I think that the next step is kind of equity or belonging, or a sense of that voice being actually heard, because I think that there's not just the fact of being there, having 50% women or whatever sort of quota you're trying to meet, but also about the lived experience. And I think that that comes in voices, in the different people's perspectives, and listening. And that's kind of something you have to practice, being curious, being like thinking about other people and wanting to learn, and I think that that kind of comes out with the word voice, the opposite of sort of silencing, so empowering voices, let's say.
As a collection, it seems that a lot of persistence needs to be encouraged to enable these kind of diversities to be made at university and within education itself. So again, I reiterate how good these talks are and how important it is to kind of progress and keep this conversation, as difficult as it may be, or as comfortable or as annoying as they may be sometimes, to be continued, and I hope they get done. The last one, Francine, New York.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Sorry. Do I have to explain it? It's New York for me. It's oh, I cannot cough during COVID. It's where you have the feeling that everybody has a chance, where all people from all over the world go there. Sorry. I have already 2 vaccinations, I will tell you.
We trust you.
And
yeah, maybe we move on to just give you a second. But we can also, I think you can see from the diversity of the words used, we can see that the term diversity means a lot of different things, and it is really about trying to see it from different people's perspectives and trying to understand what the word really means to them. And I think it nicely takes us on to the second part, where we would like to just ask the first question. I'm going to direct it at you, Nyasha, purely because it's your turn. But just in terms of really like education, what do you feel is lacking in terms of diversity and inclusion? I know we've touched upon it a little bit, but I think it would be a good way to start the conversation.
It's a question with many answers, let's put it that way. But I think, well, what the video that you guys showed as well is that There's the student body could be more diverse, so that's already it's lacking in that way. But the professors or the teachers, that's definitely like who's teaching you, who's sort of showing you the ropes of architecture is a big part of what's lacking. And then also, what are you being taught? So I think that for the majority of architecture schools, it's very Eurocentric, and it's kind of a one voice sort of way of teaching. So I think that that's something else that's lacking. The breadth of different places, different people, different cultures, and not taught only in sort of maybe ancient. I think like some continents are only touched upon in the ancient part, and not actually in contemporary practices that are going on there and that we can all draw and learn from. So yeah.
Yeah, no, plenty of things to really pick up from, but also really to draw this out, maybe also you, Lyongo, what would you say that what do you feel like the results have really said in terms of what's lacking in education? And I ask you because you're in practice, and maybe looking in, it might be surprising or not, but what would you say as an, I don't want to say outsider because you're very much involved in education, but what do you think is kind of missing there?
I think a broader perspective, and that's not just in education. In the whole architectural world, a broader perspective is needed. It has been narrowed down to a Western architecture perspective, and I was questioning that as a student when I get architectural history. That was the name of the course, and I told the professor back then that it was Western architectural history. He was not telling me anything about the Incas and the Mayas or about the Chinese architectural history. So we have been narrowing the reality, and to react on Federico, because we have been narrowing reality so much, diversity becomes a difficulty. But if we would have had, if you grow up in a broader perspective, I mean, if you would have to pinpoint my daughters, they are a quarter Moroccan, a quarter Curaçaolian, and half Dutch. So I think for them it's quite easy to accept the next culture, because, you know, we eat sometimes out of one pot when we are eating couscous, then we eat with knives and fork, you know, and so I think what is very important in education is to have a broader perspective. And it's not about representation, but it's about, you know, I was shocked when one of the urban designers, also graduated from TU Delft, told me that she experienced exactly what I experienced 30 years earlier. And she designed a house with a big entrance. And they said, no, but the hall in the Netherlands should be small. But she was designing it from her Curaçaolian perspective, and that is what is needed in education. So when it doesn't meet the reality of the professor, why is it wrong? And yeah, so to the students is, you know, be stubborn and explain why it's right.
And I think it's really interesting that you're touching on this, because this really starts to touch on this idea of the culture of architecture, the culture in which we have in the school, the culture in which we progress, I guess. And maybe this is an opportunity to ask you, Roberto, in terms of this culture that we're so heavily ingrained in, that maybe does say that, you know, the hall needs to be small, or that the aesthetic of our work needs to be like this. What would you say the university's role in this culture is, in the design culture at large, I guess?
I have so many points I would love to raise, but I will raise one that Lyongo already raised, is that we are here to serve the public. We are here with a public mission. Even if you are the owner of a private enterprise and you are doing architecture, you're serving the public. So who is this public we are serving? Are they all the same? Are they just like us? They aren't, right? They are not. How can you design housing for people who are very different from you if you don't experience that? And I think this public mission, this public character of architecture is missing for me. That we design for the city, we don't design only for the client. Of course, the client is important. I understand that, but we are designing for many more people. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you talk about this publicness and designing in practice. Maybe I can ask you, Francine, being in practice and successfully designing all these buildings, these very public buildings, these libraries, for instance, the New York Library that you've just opened, these are very public spaces of which different people should come to. How do you see, or how do you manage to design these spaces with the knowledge that people maybe in education aren't being very open or taught about the diversity that would house these, that your designs would house in these places?
Yeah, that's for me a skill by trying to observe, but also try to observe a city and observe, because when I design something in New York, it's totally different than from how it's used in Washington or how it's used in a tropical country. So I try to imagine, but also to try to stay there and to observe and think what is good. And also, even in these different parts of the world, also there the people are not all the same. So try to be, to not design the whole building as one atmosphere, because there's different people who like different atmosphere. But I also wanted to react on what the two of you were saying. In a way, it starts before you come to this school. Who did select to study architecture? I came here to study architecture in Delft because my brother, who was 1 year above me, 1.5 years, he studied architect, and he took me to what was the old faculty, to the model making room, and I said, yes, this is nice. And so it was very much based also on, and also another brother was studying in Delft. So it was the culture at home. I have 3 brothers and 1 sister, and there was no difference between boys and girls in my house, in my family, where I was living. So that was very important. I never forget that I was selected as the architect in Boston in an Afro-American neighborhood. But in a way, they would love to have an Afro-American architect. But in a way, there was no Afro-American architect, or not really. In the team, we, Meccano, with somebody from Boston, there was 1 Afro-American guy in that team. So sometimes we were sitting together in the car, and then we said to each other, we are the minority. And that's why we are selected. But in a way, it's crazy. I'm not a minority. I'm part of 50% of population. And Afro-Americans, especially in that neighborhood of Boston, are also the majority. So it's very strange. But he explained to me that in his Afro-American culture, it's not sexy to study architecture. They don't go to study architecture. So it starts, I just want to say it starts already more early, all the issues that we have here also in the school. There's a lot about culture, but even if I would love to go, I also do quite some things in Rotterdam South, what is maybe one of the poorest area of the Netherlands. I think most of them are not thinking of, they would love to study architecture. It's
yeah, I think this is one of the questions that we have, and we really discuss a lot, this culture of which architecture is, like the design culture, let's say. That maybe the reason why we're even having this talk is because we feel that maybe sometimes it can be a little bit exclusive, or maybe not as inviting to everyone in certain instances. So it's interesting that you pick that out in your answer. And I just want to ask if you, Federico, being a student within the culture, do you notice this like exclusive, elitist, maybe atmosphere?
Yeah, okay. So I do feel it. And you can feel it in many ways. You can feel it because if you come, as I do, from Colombia, then you'll see the Netherlands as an elitist country. I know there are many problems here, but that's how it looks, right? For me, at least, you know. Oh, they have trains and elite. Then, of course, then you can also feel this when you actually only interact with internationals, and myself included, which was something Roberto was saying before. In the end, the internationals, we are the diversity. I mean, it's easy to say you're diverse, but then we tend to come from an elite in our countries, or we are paying a very high price to be here, right? Bank loans and all this stuff, which in any case you wouldn't get if you were not, if you were not able to prove you have the means. So that's a thing. Sometimes even if you get people here, you can ask if you're really getting a diverse body of students, because I can think about many people who went with me to the bachelor's in Colombia who were way more talented than me, but they had to work from day one, provide for their families, and they could not think about preparing a nice portfolio and all this stuff to come here. I mean, so yeah, you know, sometimes you can ask if you're really getting the best from everywhere in the world or just the best who can pay. So, yeah, totally.
That was really well said. I would like to touch back on what you said, Francine, about coming into TU Delft. And I want to ask you a little bit more about you when you were studying here, actually. What would you have liked to have seen to help you bolster your education, and even more so specifically when you were moving from education into practice? How would you have liked the education or the practice to have helped you as a young professional move into this kind of sphere? Because in that time as well, it was less women here at TU Delft, and definitely in practices in itself, and it's an interesting kind of reflection to see where we've come so far.
To be honest, if I remember when I was a student, and then at that time there was 15% was female. You also had female studies, but to be honest, I was totally not interested. I just wanted to go my way. So I didn't need help of anybody, to be honest. I had so much passion and good student friends. So we really worked in a collaborative way. But I told you also at home from my parents and my brothers and sisters, there was no difference between being a girl or a boy. So for me, it was totally not an issue. And I started to put some attention on, and I also, you know, I can imagine that all of you don't want to be good because you are a female architect. You want to be good because you want to be an architect. So that's also a discussion with I can imagine with the women here in the audience. So what the hell, you know? It's. I was also very much amazed. I became professor here in TU Delft in the year 2000, and I was the first female professor in architecture in the whole of the Netherlands, you know. And then you think we are a very well-developed country. I was amazed. I was totally not aware of it, but I was the very first one, also between Eindhoven and Delft and Twente. And but to be honest, I didn't care. I just wanted to go. And but now, to be honest, and I think I also told you, I feel the responsibility. If I analyze my own office, we have a lot of female architects and designers in the office. But in the tops, it becomes more male, and that's not good. So I want to change that for this year. But you know, I also want to put. I also want to ask the architects and the students, what do you need? I didn't need anything, to be honest. But I think we have to take care of it. But also don't be. I also very much aware it's a very tough job.
Demanding.
It's very demanding, time demanding. It is, and maybe Even if I've also been teaching at Yale and Harvard and Mendrisio and whatever, but also what I hear in Delft is that is even a culture that is created by architecture schools, that you have to work day and night and, you know, we don't earn a lot money and whatever. I think it's a wrong culture. You know, you have to live and study and design in a healthy way. You have to see what is needed, as the both of you told, that you're working for society. Then you don't do that by working day and night behind your computer. You know, you have to see what's needed in society. You have to experience what all these different cultures, poor areas, different cultures. You have to go there, you have to experience, you have to see it. But the way the education is often, not just here in Delft, but in all the schools, I've of course not been to all the schools, but to many schools, I do not agree with the education system, to be honest.
So you believe that the education system is more responsible for providing this diversity and inclusion or at least a better outlook from the beginning, from the educational standpoint?
From the beginning, but also the awareness that you're developing people, you're developing human beings, you're developing students, male, female, whatever color of skin, and help them to develop, but not like pushing them to do everything day and night behind the computer. I do not agree with that.
Neither do I.
But it's a culture, I don't know if you agree with it, in all the schools where I've been teaching. Architecture schools.
Architecture schools, indeed. I guess this is a good time to go back to Federico as a part of the student body here. Do you feel that TU Delft basically is equipping you with the tools to...
Is what, sorry? Again?
Equipping you with the kind of tools for this kind of diversity and inclusion outside of university, or do you think you're being somewhat
That's super contextual. I mean, perhaps for a Dutch student who's going to practice her whole life in the Netherlands, it might be the case. I don't know, you know. I don't know the context enough. Might not be the case. But let's see. In any case, I believe not always. And I can only talk from my perspective in urbanism, of course, but I feel that sometimes we cannot face reality, you know. If you put us in a neighborhood, how do you start? How do you engage in a conversation? How do you turn that into valuable data for whatever you're going to do? No? Because that's part of knowing or learning how to represent someone different than you when there's no one else that will do it, right? Sometimes that will be the case. Of course, we could always try to have I don't know, one architect from Curaçao for all projects in Curaçao, not this direct, like, mathematical relationship, but that will not always be the case. So then you need the tools to really let the other one, the different one, speak, learn from that, and then do. And I believe that sometimes those tools come from sociology, anthropology, all these other fields that, especially here in TU Delft, because we still have this like very technical focus, are missing. And sometimes I felt in the Netherlands that is like if all Dutch knowledge is applied knowledge. So for me it's, you know, theory, sometimes, that's my feeling, is seen as a secondary or sometimes even not so necessary thing. And in the end, theory is the one that sometimes allows you to connect at these higher levels of thinking before even you start taking your pencil and doing. So from that perspective, I'd say no, not really.
Sorry to interject, just and then we can come to you. But then where do you feel like the fact that you identified that there are these tools that you need that kind of branch out to sociology and etc. Well, where do you feel like you have found that that's the case, if not in your educational environment?
I mean, I know that's missing because I feel, I mean, it's literally when you're doing an interview, it's like, okay, I have an interview, what do I do with this now, right? I don't know, you know, I look at it and it's like, nice, this person told me things, and I have another interview, how do I compare, right? These are tools, I mean, I feel the void, you could say. It's not like I say, oh, I'm missing this, it's like I'm feeling that hole there. So yeah, that's what I could say from a very local TU Delft urbanism perspective.
Okay, thank you. Lyongo, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to comment on two things. One is that, at the one end, you have to, as a student, don't worry too much if it preparing you completely for the practice. In one sense, what is important is what Francine said, that you have the space to develop yourself as a person, as an architect. So if the courses are all fit for practice, maybe that's less important than that there is space within the educational system that if you find it necessary to study, get a course in anthropology so that you can understand a neighborhood that you visit better, that you have that space to do that, because that is for you is important for you as to develop in a good architect. So I think that is very, very important that you have the space for individual development. What I did during my studies, I got a 5.5 for a design assignment, and then I said, I'm going to do things differently. So I looked for professors that understood me, and then I created a project, which now is impossible. But if I didn't have those professors, the chances are pretty big that I never would have graduated as an architect. And my grades went from 5.5 to the lowest grade I ever got again for a design was, I think, an 8.5. So that is the difference between being able to design from within, from what you feel, from that void you were talking about. If you are able to get the energy out of that void and create, you go to a very different level. And that is very worrying about the educational system now, that you are like in a reproducing system, that they push things in you and you have to reproduce, and you don't have the time to digest and create your own reality, because there are many, many, many realities. There's not one reality.
There's also not one architect.
No.
You are training here, there's place for so many diverse architects. And I think the school, and that's nice, I think what's nice about the Delft University, it's a big school, so there's place for all these different architects. Because the smaller schools are often very dominated by certain architects that you have to do it that way. But the richness of the tradition of Delft has always, I don't know if it's still like that, is that you can, we called it a supermarket. But is it still like that? I do not know. Do you get enough freedom to develop yourself, or you have to follow certain paths? I don't know that for the existing system.
I mean, I know what you're talking about because I interviewed you and Herzberg and all these old students, like from the faculty. You know, you were here in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and I usually heard that, like, we went to this professor, she was the different one, he was the different one, he was proposing different stuff, and then he was the one who enabled us to, or who helped us develop certain interests that were unique. I don't hear that kind of stories that much anymore here. What I hear again, I am not in architecture, so, but yeah.
It's also a consequence of the whole system that you have to monitor everything you do. You know, you have a course outline, and you have the educational goals, and et cetera, et cetera. And you know, they give that idea that education is about meeting these, you know, separate goals in every course. But education is about something bigger than that, because maybe you miss one part. But for instance, I'm going to stay with you because you give the great examples. I mean, if for instance you didn't finish the urban design that you were working on, but you had a great anthropological analysis of the area, that can be celebrated. But if you go to the system, you will not pass the course, because they cannot say, okay, yes, he passed all these leerdoelen, how do you call that in English?
Learning objectives.
The learning objectives, yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe Roberto, you would like to say something?
I'd like to raise 2 points. One, addressing what Francine said, and I was asking myself while you were speaking, what's the importance of having role models? Do we have heroes, or do we have people we want to, or isn't it nice to see that somebody that is like you has done it? So that's one thing, and I think you have to be very strong when you don't have any. And the other thing, I'm super happy that Lyongo brought up the issue with preparing for practice. Because when I say it, people say, oh, yeah, but you are in your ivory tower, right? I don't think we can prepare you for practice entirely. What I think is our job, our mission, is to make you critical and agile, and that you can decide what you want. And in that sense, I agree with Federico that it's not, what we do is not enough. So I agree with that. But I disagree with, oh, we are not preparing you for practice. I don't think that's the main. I know people are going to hate me for saying that, but that's not the main thing for me.
Yeah, and I don't know if Nyasha, do you have something you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to add something, because I always feel like education is the moment to be exposed to things that you wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. It's like when I think of me being younger, I grew up in Paris and in Brussels and then in the States, and my mother was always very adamant about us reading books with, black protagonists who were girls, or having black dolls and having things that also looked like me. And it was the kind of thing where I wasn't going to find that in the books that we were reading at the school that I was going to necessarily, and I wasn't going to see it on TV. So my mom made a point of making that happen at home. And I think that education is that, in the sense where practice may not be perfect. There are things that aren't going to be solved today. We want to make huge changes in practice, but in education, we have this opportunity to expose students to things that they wouldn't see otherwise. And so that can be just different types of studios that kind of confront you with these questions or these biases that you have, so that then you have the tools to get into practice and say, hey, well, yeah, this park doesn't think about teen girls because they're not thought about in designs of most parks. Or the elderly people, how can they get where they need to go and have places to rest in this urban plan? They're not thought about either. And so I think that in school, this should be the moment where you're pushed to see these things and recognize your own biases that you're designing for reference man or Le Corbusier's Le Modular, who doesn't represent any one of us here, let's say. So that's what I think education needs to do. And because it's not bound by budget and client and everything else with all stakeholders, you have an opportunity to be a bit more free and to explore things that you will be confronted with in practice, but in a different way, and you'll have a critical sort of way to address it then. So I think that's what education can do that practice doesn't quite do yet.
And I think that that's really interesting, this idea that the education is almost preparing you for this unknown, but equipping you with the tools that kind of help you respond to whatever comes your way. And I think that this is where we will come back to you, Roberto, and maybe ask you, what do you think what more that you kind of touched on, what is the more that the university can do to maybe help people broaden their perspectives? I mean, maybe you can also introduce the diversity group and what that's trying to do to help.
That's a very tough question. What shall we change? And I'm asking everybody to help us understand what must be changed. For me, there are certain things. So we see in this building, we tend to see things from one perspective, I think, and that's a problem. I think we need to allow students to experience more. So this experiential experience going to places and interviewing people, like Federico said, experience talking to people who are different, experience having to do an interview, for example. So this experiential aspect, I think, is missing. But I also think that we ought to abandon this idea that everything that is European is the norm, and everything that is non-European is folkloric or exotic or wrong. And really, of course, being in a university in Northeastern Europe, I mean, we are in Europe, it's very difficult to say that.
Yeah. And does anybody else have any other thoughts as well to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think Francine touched on it, that it starts before the university. And when she said that, and for the Dutch society, it's also important to get a broader perspective of the Dutch history. And of the Dutch history, what was the Dutch history? That when I participate in a webinar of Rotterdam, and my name appears in the screen as Lyongo Juliana, and the moderator changes it to Juliana Lyongo. Because, Juliana is a first name. I know it's a female first name. But if you would know the Dutch history, then you would know that a lot of people in Curacao have a last name of a female as their last name. So if you would know that, then you wouldn't have to do that change, because it would be logical. There's even a very known poet of Curacao that has the last name Juliana, but no one knows that in the Netherlands. So it starts with a proper historical perspective of who you actually are, and then that makes it much easier to accept that there's not just a Western Europe perspective. Because if you realize that the world population, Western Europe is 10%, right? Asia is 60%. So just by numbers, Africa is 20%. So you can check it. That's the reality. So it would be crazy to keep thinking that this 10% for the future will be the dominant culture. And if you look at how the world is changing at this moment, if I was a student now, I would like to be prepared to be able to deal with a world that is much broader than just this Western perspective of reality.
So I pose another question to you on the basis of that, and that is the kind of critique that if education is a conveyor belt for creating homogeneous ideas, then is practice the incubator of the homogeneous designers?
Maybe we can put that on the screen.
Okay, sure.
Can you show it?
Yeah.
Read it once more and digest it.
Where is it? There you go. So if design education is a conveyor belt for creating homogeneous ideas, then practice is the incubator for homogeneous designers.
I've been away a long time. I lived 12 and a half years in Curacao, and then I came back. I'm back 4 years. And what I realized in practice here in the Netherlands is that it's quite homogeneous. And even though everybody says they want diversity and inclusion, and some people even approach me for that topic, for design, and I start questioning them at the beginning. So you want me, so you can say, okay, I have this black architect, or do you actually want my ideas? It's quite homogeneous, and I think, and it's not only about the architecture; it's the whole process from initiating an idea and getting a building at the end. And it's quite homogeneous. This is how it goes. This is how it goes in the Netherlands. You have to, this is the brief, this is how a floor plan is in the Netherlands. It's all fixed. And now you have this black architect telling you that he questions it. And how dare I question this reality? And I'm quite aware that, the Dutch culture is a culture that they want security. they know everything, is planned. People ask me in January where I'm going in summer, and I'm like, summer is so far away. I have no idea. I don't even know if I'm alive then. I'm quite positive, but I don't know. And so there is very little space for question and also for spontaneous things. And I think we have reached to the top of organizing and rules and things in the Netherlands. Curaçao, 155,000 people. They were much faster in giving the people a vaccine. Why? Because they are bad planners, but they are very creative. I mean, ask a Curaçaoian to organize a party for tomorrow and he will be able to do it. A Dutch will tell you no, but we have to write the protocol first. We have to check with all these different, and that system. I mean, yes, I would like to get some more space within the system. Not only for architects, for the whole belt.
The whole belt of the Netherlands. So getting looser. Nyasha, do you have any other ideas of how?
Yeah, I was also thinking about the fact that sometimes even within this sort of homogeneous, there might be a sort of sense of diversity in the sense where people might be there. But coming back to the idea of voice, I'm not sure that their voices are heard. And it reminds me of once at the BNA Architectendag, so it's kind of like the day for architects where you have just lots of Dutch architects coming together to network and chat. And so the group was about 50-50 women and men. And the keynote speaker had this interactive talk where he would sort of throw a little ball over with a mic in it and people could talk in this and could give their opinions and share. And of the 9 speakers, guess how many women spoke? Zero. And I think if you were to ask the women there, do you feel discriminated against, or is this a diverse group? They'd be like, yeah, I mean, we're here. I don't think that they would feel discriminated against at all. But in the end, there's something going on there where they don't have the room to, and I think even just acknowledging this and saying that this is happening can also help to change things. So these kind of nudges, I think Google also did this when they were trying to get more women to be promoted in the company, because you had to sort of sign up to be promoted, and men were more open to doing this, and women just weren't signing themselves up. So they just sent, an email every now and then saying, hey, we've noticed that women aren't signing up. You should. And women started signing up. So I think that sometimes it's also just about knowing that some of these things are happening. We don't see them. You might be in class where you think, where it's a diverse class, but only one type of group is dominating the conversation. And so then they dominate the ideas, they dominate what's going to happen and the outcomes. So there's also an element of understanding our biases, even when it's yourself, understanding when you're holding yourself back or when you're pushing other people out of the conversation. And that's something we can do in education and in practice, of course, but it's also an important part of diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. And I almost want to take the opportunity of having an audience. If anybody has any questions or reactions to what Nyasha's just said, it would be quite interesting. Yes, Saskia, I think you have to come down to this microphone.
Given that we're talking about raising awareness, I was wondering if it'd be interesting to do a show of hands about the audience and see how diverse the audience is, to see whether the interest in diversity is held by diverse people.
We could definitely do that. That's a great idea. I don't know, do you want us to ask the questions maybe? Maybe we can ask some of them. We can just do a quick show of hands maybe. If you guys, one of the questions was, do you guys feel that you are represented in the university as students, in the student body?
You put your hands up.
Sorry, yes, if you put your hands up and no. Okay, and then if you take that into practice, do you think you will be represented when you go into practice? Okay, and is anybody whose hand was up first and then they didn't put their hand up, does someone want to maybe just talk about that and maybe why? No? It's kind of tough, but maybe the panel can react to that actually. And like, why do you think the students, or maybe it's something that we need to discuss, why are students feeling that they are represented in the student body, but then going into practice they won't be? Maybe, sorry to put it on you, because the rest of your students haven't really spoken up.
Jesus, guys. I have to speak for you. I don't know. This is a tough one for me, at least. I've always felt represented. I mean, not that much here, but I mean, perhaps I could talk from my experience here, like in the Netherlands. And why, for example, I decided I'm going to go back. I'm going to make this super autobiographical. Sorry, but. There was a moment where I felt that if I started or I tried to practice here in the Netherlands, I was just not going to go anywhere I wanted to go to, right? It's like I feel Europe stopped producing new ideas like a century ago. I feel it's easy to lose touch with the urgent matters of the world here in Europe because you are comfortable here in the end, or I would be comfortable.
But I might, sorry to interrupt, I might stop you there to maybe get a reaction to that, even just that first quote, let's say. Does anybody have any reaction to that before you go into your life story?
Go for it.
I think every human being wants a certain sense of belonging, and that is so important, and so it's quite a challenge to find that, having a migration background, to find that within a company, because very often they will accept you and your productivity, but will they give space to your different ideas? And that is a challenge, because especially when you start, you don't have maybe all the tools to prove that your idea is a good idea, and that is the biggest challenge. Because if you look at the bigger firms, they have quite a lot of international architects, but I always wonder the amount of input. Can these architects come with their own ideas? If I look at our company, there's a lot of room for improvement, you know. So, yeah.
Francine, would you like to add anything to that on the terms of practice?
First of all, I want to say what I think you were saying this, that I think there are many different offices in the Netherlands, so it's quite interesting. Like when I finished school, I started my own office, but you know, there was no place where I would love to work, because at that time was also economic crisis, and the offices that were there were, for me, totally not interesting. But I think at this moment there are many, many different kind of offices, the big ones, but also the small ones, and or you can start your own thing. So, what I want, and also be aware that being an architect is always depending on a client. And I think, for me, the Netherlands has always been very open-minded, also because we used to have, but I think we still have some open-minded clients. I did experience working in the more Anglo-Saxon culture, that there was much less open-minded possibilities. Because that was much more what I did experience, very much commercial or money-driven culture, the Anglo-Saxon culture. Of course, that also came now more to the Netherlands. Okay, what I wanted to say. But in a way, there is also a lot of freedom that you can select to go your own way and select the office where you would like to work. So I think that but maybe I'm reflecting on my own office that there's a lot of freedom. We used to have a lot of Brazilian architects, and they're really part of our culture. But that's maybe also that I'm from the southern part of the Netherlands, and I'm not Calvinistic myself. So I love people coming from these countries because they are more part of where my heart is. So, but if you can also go to the other offices that have another heart in their company. So I still think there's a lot of opportunities in the Netherlands. But still, if I look to the leadership of all these offices, we can be more open-minded. But also, to be honest, it's also a little bit difficult with, we also have a lot of foreign people in the office. Are they planning to stay in the Netherlands? You know, it is always, it's a little bit difficult. At a certain moment they stay, or they buy a house, or they get a family, or they marry a Dutch partner. So it's part of a very personal development of a human being.
Yeah, it's quite complex.
But I still, of course, it can be something to be limited. But I think the open-minded culture in the Netherlands is for me still often more open-minded than many other countries. We have a lot of Italian people at this moment in the office. We call it Little Italy in the office. But for them it's very difficult to work in their own country. There is more, I don't know how you experience, but there is more freedom, and maybe our office gets also a little bit more freedom. I think in the Dutch offices than in many other countries, or it's not true? I always feel like if I compare all the UK offices, they are for me almost like one office.
That depends on how you define freedom, I'd say. You have opulence in this country. You have the means to be free in specific ways.
Yeah.
You can make beautiful, amazing, strange shapes in this country with amazing materials. We have other kinds of freedom. I'd say we have the freedom of scarcity, which is not always nice. No, we cannot exoticize scarcity. We cannot say these things, but when you have scarcity, another kind of creativity is born, and it's more radical, I'd say. That's perhaps why when I come here, I see no creativity. That's my position. Of course, there might be. I'm just blind to it, right? Because I come from this context where creativity expresses in another way. It's not in shapes, it's not in the abundance, it's not in good clients. Clients tend to be shitty. Working conditions are not the same. It's not nice in many ways, but there's other kinds of freedoms. No? So I'd say that that's very relative, the freedom also.
And maybe Lyongo?
I think the Dutch society is indeed very open-minded as long as you are willing to be like they want you to be. And that is, you know, we have to let go of that idea that the Dutch society is very open-minded. Because if it was very open-minded, please explain to me that we have never had a female prime minister as yet. The little island where I grew up, we had 4 in the past 40 years. And we are known for a macho society. So this idea of the Dutch culture being open-minded is standing in the way of having a more diverse and inclusive society. Because if this society was so open-minded, I would not have to feel awkward coming into a hall for architecture presentation. I would not have to feel awkwardness with the one serving me in an airplane when I'm not even sitting business class, I'm sitting comfort class in KLM. I live in Amsterdam for that reason, that I feel comfortable, let's say 90% of the time. I don't feel different. If this country was so open-minded, then I didn't have to feel different the moment I go to a place like Apeldoorn or I go to Amersfoort. So that is the reality. We are not so open-minded. I mean, still our system is organized in a way, especially for women, that women stay at home. I mean, they deliver things during the day. Who is at home during the day? Nobody is at home, right? Everybody is working, but no. We have kinderopvang, which starts, I think, at 8 or even later. In Curaçao, kinderopvang starts at 7 or 6:30 in the morning, and it stays open until like 7 at night. If you want kinderopvang different days in the week, different weeks, because, for instance, my wife was a flight attendant, it's only one in Amsterdam back then. So we have to get away from this idea. You know, I had a discussion at the office because I came from abroad, and then they said, yeah, you moet integreren in het bureau. I have to integrate into the office. And I told them, what do you mean with integrate? Does that mean that I only have to change? Or are you also willing to adapt to certain things that I bring? And that is the point where we have to get into, if we want to talk about diversity and inclusiveness in education, is about getting away from, the first point is to accept we are not so open-minded that we think we are. And it's about learning your history. How open-minded was your history? How open-minded is your education about your recent history? I mean, you know, what we have done in recent history is not so open-minded.
Can I interject? Because I think this is so important for this faculty. We can't have diversity if we remain, Dutch design temple. I think everyone who comes here will change this Dutch design, and the Dutch design will change. It's impossible. Sometimes people talk to me about Dutch traditions of design as if it were a very static thing. That it got somehow in the past we know what it is and it can't change anymore. So yeah, I have a problem with that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I like the way the conversation has kind of steered back to education, because at the end of the day we are in a school of design. I wonder if we have a moment to just jump to like a few of our quick fire session. This is the ending session, where we basically picked out some questions or points that have been candidly dropped into conversation between students, and we feel like it would be a good like advisory session where maybe the panel can almost respond and give advice to some of these. So I'm just going to read them all out, and then you can pick and choose which ones you want to respond to. So the first one is, what do you say to the student who feels they should not be part of the conversation because they are white, male, and not diverse? What do you say to the student who believes they should not be taught by a diverse teaching staff because we are in the Netherlands and the Dutch population is predominantly white?
What do you say to the student who asks, what does a woman bring to the table that I cannot bring? What do you say to the student that says, I would rather be taught by the best, regardless of race and gender and sexual orientation and disability, and therefore diversity and inclusion is not that important in education?
What do you say to the student that says, maybe there are no black people in architecture schools because they do not want to study architecture? What do you say to the student that says, is wealth really that important, that much of an issue? Is it really important to, in the process of education? At the end of the day, we are all students. No one cares about wealth.
And finally, what do you say to the student that feels overwhelmed by this conversation and doesn't actually know how to address their own implicit biases, or even recognize them, for the very least? What advice would you give them?
You feel free to pick any of them. I'm not sure if one really spoke out to you, but
we can circulate back on them.
I feel like there's multiple that just kind of jump out at me, but okay, I can take this one with the, to recognize our implicit biases. I think it has to be more inclusive in the sense where it's not a, them versus us, or you are the problem because you are a white male or something. No, it's just about everyone being a part of this discussion of inclusiveness and inclusion, and recognizing that we all have biases. I feel like there's a nice riddle, which is that it's a son and a father who are in a car accident, and it's tragic, and the father dies. The son is rushed to the hospital, and he's wheeled into the operating room, and the surgeon looks down and says, "I can't operate on this boy, he's my son." How is that? Like, how can that be? I was thinking, when I heard this, I thought, I don't know. I'm married to a woman. I didn't even think, I thought maybe he's gay, the guy, and so, he was his dad. It's just that the surgeon was actually his mom. And the thing is that for the most part, people don't even think that the surgeon could be a woman. It's crazy. Even if you have your mother is a surgeon, even if your mother works, these things are so ingrained. It goes beyond, what you look like, and we all see the same messages. We're all sort of bombarded with one story. So it's work that we all have to do, and there's no one that's excluded from the diversity and inclusion discussion. So I think it's really important to realize we all have these biases, and that they stop us from doing so many things ourselves and others, in the way we interact with people, in the way that we hire people, that we think they're competent to do things or not, or the types of jobs we give to people in the office because they're a woman, so you do more. Can you get a coffee for this client? All these kinds of things are a part of our biases, and we need to be aware of them first, so that then you can say, wow, okay, let me try to change this. It's a process, but first step, understand that we all have implicit biases.
Thank you, that really sums it all up.
I'd go for the first one. How was it? The white male, because that's me. So I can represent that one. I don't know if I can represent you, but I can represent that one. So it's like, I don't know if it's about being diverse or not diverse, but it's like, you are one of we are one of the protagonists of the conversation, right? It's like we've been sitting in this very comfortable chair for centuries, white, male, there. And it's us who have to move, give space so other can also sit there, right? So that action also initiates in you. You're the one starting that also. Of course, it's as Lyongo said in the beginning, you need to give the space, right? And that's something we do, because if we don't do, we have a system that will perpetuate us in these positions of power until someone forcefully moves us. That'll be right, It's what follows if you just don't listen. So, you are relevant because you're a protagonist, You're occupying the chair. What can you do?
Thank you. That's really interesting. Does anyone else want to respond to any?
Yeah, I don't exactly remember the one that says that it's not necessary to get the diversity. I always use this example. We will start with the European Championship this week, and imagine we would appoint the coach for the Netherlands and tell him, you have one task, but you are not allowed to have anyone with a migration background on the squad. And that is what we are doing in other parts of society. It's not just about a social thing. It's even an economical thing that we have to start thinking more inclusive, because the reality is that in a few decades, the white society is a minority, and it will only become smaller. So if you believe that you can stay within that bubble becomes smaller and smaller, and your world will become smaller and smaller instead of all these possibilities that the reality that we live today gives us. So I don't think you really have a choice, actually.
Any others, or we can move on if not?
If I may, I'd like to answer to that person who said, I want to be taught by the best and diversity doesn't play a role here. How do you know that? How do you know that all the Einsteins and female Einsteins who don't get to be Einsteins, and people from other places who don't get to even come here, how do you know you're being taught by the best? I don't think you can know if you don't look broader to other people, to people who are maybe they are invisible. And I think that the problem of invisibility is really huge.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Would you like to, Francine?
Oh, yeah, it's so complex at the same time because it has to do with education, with history, how the history is written. I can even tell you how I did experience, but I won't tell you because often I even don't exist in the Netherlands. So that's also very male-dominated, I can tell you, even in school. But I think you should believe in yourself. That's my advice. You are sitting here, you're the new generation, and if you want to change it, you're sitting here with you all together. As I can see, it's very diverse. Change it, you can do it, believe in it, and you have to do it. That's the way.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions. I think we'll close up.
Yeah, definitely. We'll close up, and we just want to say thank you, everyone, for your attention. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your knowledge and your advice. And we just want to end this whole conversation with something that we hope that you just go away with and you can think about, ponder on. And it's a quote by Anna Matic, which says, "We need to culminate the fact that human interaction between different people is important because the connection between you and someone else, someone that's different than you, is what makes you who you are. If we lose sight of the other, if the other is not part of our daily reality, no matter who that other is, we lose something very valuable. The ability to constantly redefine ourselves in relation to others." Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for talking.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating today. Thank you, Tomi and Kat, again, for all the work that you have done, and for the participants for all the ideas that they have shared. I leave with the feeling that we are not that far away from 1937, the quote that I showed at the beginning. I think I live with the feeling that we really need to keep talking about diversity and including it in our programs. So I think us educators have a lot to do still. There's a long way to go, and besides or beyond the Netherlands, there's a whole planet which really needs us to keep addressing these issues. Thank you very much again. I would like to invite everyone to come back next 1st of July for the next BK Talks. We will be talking about something which is not unrelated to what we have been doing today. We will be talking about African urbanization, or urbanization in Africa. As you may all know, it's a territory which is suffering rampant urbanization, and in many cases importing exogenous European, Western, or Asian models of urbanization. So we would like to address that topic next time. Thank you very much.